The Middle Assyrian Empire. Of the Assyrian Empire, scholars variously date the beginning of the Middle Assyrian period to either the fall of the Old Assyrian kingdom of Shamshi-Adad I, or to the ascension of Ashur-uballit to the throne of Assyria. Assyrian expansion and empire, 1392 to 1056 BC. By the reign of Erebor-Adad I, Mitanni influence over Assyria was on the wane. Erebor-Adad I became involved in a dynastic battle between Tushratta and his brother Artatama II, and after this his son Shartana III, who called himself king of the Hurra while seeking support from the Assyrians. A pro-Assyria faction appeared at the royal Mitanni court. Erebor-Adad I had thus finally broken Mitanni influence over Assyria, and in turn had now made Assyria an influence over Mitanni affairs. Ashur-uballit succeeded the throne of Assyria in 1365 BC, and proved to be a fierce, ambitious and powerful ruler. Assyrian pressure from the southeast and Hittite pressure from the northwest enabled Ashur-uballit to break Mitanni power. He met and decisively defeated Shartana II, the Mitanni king, in battle, making Assyria once more an imperial power at the expense of not only the Mitanni themselves, but also Kassite Babylonia, the Hurrians and the Hittites, and a time came when the Kassite king in Babylon was glad to marry Mabalatat-Serua, the daughter of Ashur-uballit, whose letters to Akhenaten of Egypt form part of the Amarna letters. This marriage led to disastrous results for Babylonia, as the Kassite faction at court murdered the half-Assyrian Babylonian king and placed a pretender on the throne. Ashur-uballit promptly invaded Babylonia to avenge his son-in-law, entering Babylon, deposing the king and installing Kurugalzu II of the royal line king there. Ashur-uballit then attacked and defeated Matawaza, the Mitanni king, despite attempts by the Hittite king Suppiluliuma, now fearful of growing Assyrian power, to help the Mitanni. The lands of the Mitanni and Hurrians were duly appropriated by Assyria, making it a large and powerful empire. Enlil-nireri succeeded Ashur-uballit. He described himself as a great king. In letters to the Hittite kings, he was immediately attacked by Kurugalzu II of Babylon, who had been installed by his father, but succeeded in defeating him, repelling Babylonian attempts to invade Assyria, counterattacking and appropriating Babylonian territory in the process, thus further expanding Assyria. The successor of Enlil-nireri, Arigden-ili, consolidated Assyrian power, and successfully campaigned in the Zagros Mountains to the east, subjugating the Lulubarangutians. In Syria, he defeated Semitic tribes of the so-called Ulamanmu group, who were possibly predecessors of the Aramaeans or an Aramaean tribe. He was followed by Adad-nireri, who made Kalu his capital, and continued expansion to the northwest, mainly at the expense of the Hittites and Hurrians, conquering Hittite territories such as Karchemish and beyond. He then moved into northeastern Asia Minor, conquering Shupria. Adad-nireri made further gains to the south, annexing Babylonian territory and forcing the Kassite rulers of Babylon into accepting a new frontier agreement in Assyria's favor. Adad-nireri's inscriptions are more detailed than any of his predecessors. He declares that the gods of Mesopotamia called him to war, a statement used by most subsequent Assyrian kings. He referred to himself again as Sharu-Rabi and conducted extensive building projects in Ashur and the provinces. In 1274 BC, Shalmaneser I ascended the throne. He proved to be a great warrior king. During his reign he conquered the Hurran kingdom of Urartu that would have encompassed most of eastern Anatolia and the Caucasus Mountains in the 9th century BC, and the fierce Gutians of the Zagros. He then attacked the Mitanni Hurrians, defeating both King Shatrara and his Hittite and Aramean allies, finally completely destroying the Hurra-Mitanni kingdom in the process. During the campaign against the Hittites, Shatrara cut off the Assyrian army from their supply of food and water. But the Assyrians broke free in a desperate battle, counterattacked, and conquered and annexed what remained of the Mitanni kingdom. Shalmaneser I installed an Assyrian prince, Iluipidar, as ruler of Mitanni, with Assyrian governors such as Meli-Sah, installed to rule individual cities. The Hittites, having failed to save Mitanni, allied with Babylon in an unsuccessful economic war against Assyria for many years. Assyria was now a large and powerful empire, and a major threat to Egyptian and Hittite interests in the region, and was perhaps the reason that these two powers, fearful of Assyrian might, made peace with one another. Like his father, Shalmaneser was a great builder, and he further expanded the city of Kallu at the juncture of the Tigris and Zab rivers. Shalmaneser's son and successor, Tukulti-Ninurta, won a major victory against the Hittites and their king Tidali IV at the Battle of Nirea and took thousands of prisoners. He then conquered Babylonia, taking Kashtiliash-IV as a captive, and ruled there himself as king for 7 years. Taking on the old title, King of Sumer and Akkad, first used by Sargon of Akkad, Tukulti-Ninurta thus became the first Akkadian-speaking native Mesopotamian to rule the state of Babylonia, its founders having been foreign Amorites, succeeded by equally foreign Kassites. Tukulti-Ninurta petitioned the god Shamash before beginning his counter-offensive. Kashtiliash-IV was captured, single-handed by Tukulti-Ninurta according to his account, who trod with my feet upon his lordly neck as though it were a footstool, and deported him ignominiously in chains to Assyria. The victorious Assyrians demolished the walls of Babylon, massacred many of the inhabitants, pillaged and plundered his way across the city to the Esagila temple, where he made off with the statue of Marduk. He then proclaimed himself king of Karduniash, king of Sumer and Akkad, king of Sippar and Babylon, king of Tilman and Melarah. Middle Assyrian texts recovered at ancient Dekatlimu include a letter from Tukulti-Ninurta to his suckle Rabiu, or Grand Vizier, Ashur-ad-Din, advising him of the approach of his general Shulman-Mushabshu escorting the captive Kashtiliash, his wife, and his retinue, which incorporated a large number of women, on his way to exile after his defeat. In the process he defeated the Elamites, who had themselves coveted Babylon. He also wrote an epic poem documenting his wars against Babylon and Elam. After a Babylonian revolt, he raided and plundered the temples in Babylon, regarded as an act of sacrilege. As relations with the priesthood in Ashur began deteriorating, Tukulti-Ninurta built a new capital city, Tukulti-Ninurta. A number of historians, including Julian Jaynes, identify Tukulti-Ninurta and his deeds as the historical origin for the fictional biblical character Nimrod in the Old Testament. However, Tukulti-Ninurta's sons rebelled and besieged the aging king in his capital. He was murdered and then succeeded by Ashur-nadin-apli, who left the running of his empire to Assyrian regional governors such as Adad-Belgab. Another unstable period for Assyria followed. It was riven by periods of internal strife, and the new king only made token and unsuccessful attempts to recapture Babylon, whose Kassite kings had taken advantage of the upheavals in Assyria and freed themselves from Assyrian rule. However, Assyria itself was not threatened by foreign powers during the reigns of Ashur-nirari III, Enlil-kudurri-Usur and Ninurta-apli-Kur. Although Ninurta-apli-Kur usurped the throne from Enlil-kudurri-Usur, Ashur-dan stabilized the internal unrest in Assyria during his unusually long reign, quelling instability. During the twilight years of the Kassite dynasty in Babylonia, he records that he seized northern Babylonia, including the cities of Zaban, Ariya and Ugar-Salu during the reigns of Marduk-apli-Adinari and Zababa-Shumer-ad-Din. plundering them and taking their vast booty to Assyria. However, the conquest of northern Babylonia brought Assyria into direct conflict with Elam, which had taken the remainder of Babylonia. The powerful Elamites, under King Shutruk-Nahunta, fresh from sacking Babylon, entered into a protracted war with Assyria. They briefly took the Assyrian city of Arapka, which Ashur-Danai then retook, eventually defeating the Elamites and forcing a treaty upon them in the process. Another very brief period of internal upheaval followed the death of Ashur-Danai, when his son and successor Ninurta-Tukulti-Ashur was deposed in his first year of rule by his own brother Mutakal-Nusku and forced to flee to Babylonia. Mutakal-Nusku himself died in the same year. A third brother, Ashur-Shishai, took the throne. This was to lead to a renewed period of Assyrian expansion and empire. As the Hittite Empire collapsed from the onslaught of the Indo-European Phrygians, Babylon and Assyria began to vie for Aramean regions, formerly under firm Hittite control. When the forces encountered one another in this region, the Assyrian king Ashur-Shishai met and defeated Nebuchadnezzar I of Babylon on a number of occasions. Assyria then invaded and annexed Hittite-controlled lands in Asia Minor, Aram, and Gutians and Kassite regions in the Zagros, marking an upsurge in Imperial expansion. Tiglath-Pileser I vies with Shamshi-Adad I and Ashur-Uballit-I among historians as being regarded as the founder of the First Assyrian Empire. The son of Ashur-Shishai, he ascended to the throne upon his father's death, and became one of the greatest of Assyrian conquerors during his 38-year reign. His first campaign in 1112 BC was against the Phrygians, who had attempted to occupy certain Assyrian districts in the upper Euphrates region of Asia Minor. After defeating and driving out the Phrygians, he then overran the Luwian kingdoms of Commagene, Cilicia and Cappadocia in western Asia Minor, and drove the Neo-Hittites from the Assyrian province of Subertu, northeast of Malaysia. In a subsequent campaign, the Assyrian forces penetrated Urartu, into the mountains south of Lake Van, and then turned westward to receive the submission of Malaysia. In his fifth year, Tiglath-Pileser again attacked Commagene, Cilicia and Cappadocia, and placed a record of his victories engraved on copper plates in a fortress he built to secure his Anatolian conquests. The Arameans of northern and central Syria were the next targets of the Assyrian king, who made his way as far as the sources of the Tigris. The control of the high road to the Mediterranean was secured by the possession of the Hittite town of Pitru at the junction between the Euphrates and Sadja. Thence he proceeded to conquer the Canaanite, Phoenician city-states of Byblos, Tyre, Sidon, Simyra, Berytus, Aradus and finally Arvad, where he embarked onto a ship to sail the Mediterranean, on which he killed an ariru or seahorse in the sea. He was passionately fond of hunting and was also a great builder. The general view is that the restoration of the temple of the gods Ashur and Hadad at the Assyrian capital of Ashur was one of his initiatives. He also invaded and defeated Babylon twice, assuming the old title, King of Sumer and Akkad, forcing tribute from Babylon. Although he did not actually depose the actual king in Babylonia, where the old Kassite dynasty had now succumbed to an Elamite one, he was succeeded by Alexikoua, who reigned for just 2 years. His reign marked the elevation of the office of Umanu in importance. Ashur-bel-Kala kept the vast empire together, campaigning successfully against Urartu and Phrygia to the north and the Aramaeans to the west. He maintained friendly relations with Marduk-Shapik-Zeri of Babylon. However, upon the death of that king, he invaded Babylonia and deposed the new ruler Kadasman-Berias, appointing Adad-Apla-Adina as his vassal in Babylon. He built some of the earliest examples of both zoological gardens and botanical gardens in Ashur, collecting all manner of animals and plants from his empire, and receiving a collection of exotic animals as tributes from Egypt. He was also a great hunter. describing his exploits at the city of Arazikh, which is before the land of Hatti, and at the foot of Mount Lebanon. These locations show that well into his reign Assyria still controlled a vast empire. Late in his reign, the Middle Assyrian Empire erupted into civil war, when a rebellion was orchestrated by Tukulti-Mer, a pretender to the throne of Assyria. Ashur-bel-Kala eventually crushed Tukulti-Mer and his allies. However, the civil war in Assyria had allowed hordes of Aramaeans to take advantage of the situation, and press in on Assyrian-controlled territory from the west. Ashur-bel-Kala counterattacked them, and conquered as far as Karchemish and the source of the Kaba River. But by the end of his reign, many of the areas of Syria and Phoenicia, Canaan to the west of these regions as far as the Mediterranean, previously under firm Assyrian control, were eventually lost to the Assyrian Empire. Assyria during the Bronze Age collapse, 1055 to 936 BC. The Bronze Age collapse from 1200 BC to 900 BC was a dark age for the entire Near East, North Africa, Asia Minor, Caucasus, Mediterranean and Balkan regions, with great upheavals and mass movements of people. Assyria and its empire were not unduly affected by these tumultuous events for some 150 years, perhaps the only ancient power that was not. However, upon the death of Ashur-bel-Kala in 1056 BC, Assyria went into a comparative decline for the next 100 or so years. The empire shrank significantly, and by 1020 BC Assyria appears to have controlled only areas close to Assyria itself, essential to keeping trade routes open in eastern Aramea, southeastern Asia Minor, central Mesopotamia and northwestern Iran. New West Semitic peoples such as the Aramaeans, Chaldeans and Sartians moved into areas to the west and south of Assyria, including overrunning much of Babylonia to the south. Indo-European-speaking Iranic peoples such as the Medes, Persians and Parthians moved into the lands to the east of Assyria, displacing the native Gutians and pressuring Elam and Mani. And to the north the Phrygians overran the Hittites. A new Harran state named Urartu arose in the Caucasus, and Cimmerians, Colchians and Scythians around the Black Sea and Caucasus. Egypt was divided and in disarray, and Israelites were battling with other fellow Semitic Canaanite peoples such as the Amalekites, Moabites, Edomites and Ammonites, and the non-Semitic Pelset Philistines for the control of southern Canaan. Despite the apparent weakness of Assyria in comparison to its former might, at heart it in fact remained a solid, well-defended nation whose warriors were the best in the world. Assyria, with its stable monarchy, powerful army and secure borders, was in a stronger position during this time than potential rivals such as Egypt, Babylonia, Elam, Phrygia, Urartu, Persia and Media. Kings such as Ashur-bel-Kala, Ereberadad II, Ashur-abi II, Ashur-nazir-pali, Tiglath-Pileser II and Ashur-dan II successfully defended Assyria's borders and upheld stability during this tumultuous time. Assyrian kings during this period appear to have adopted a policy of maintaining and defending a compact, secure nation and satellite colonies immediately surrounding it, and interspersed this with sporadic punitive raids and invasions of neighboring territories when the need arose. Ereberadad II ruled for only 2 years, and in that time continued to campaign against the Aramaeans and Neo-Hittites before he was deposed by his elderly uncle Shamshi-Adad IV, who appears to have had an uneventful reign. Ashur-nazir-pali succeeded him, and during his reign he continued to campaign endlessly against the Aramaeans to the west. Assyria was also afflicted by famine during this period. Shalmaneser II appears to have lost territory in the Levant to the Aramaeans, who also appear to have also occupied Near in Southeast Asia Minor, hitherto an Assyrian colony. Ashur-nirari-IV took the throne in 1018 BC, and captured the Babylonian city of Atlila from Simbashipak and continued Assyrian campaigns against the Aramaeans. He was eventually deposed by his uncle Ashur-abi II in 1013 BC. During the reign of Ashur-abi II, Aramean tribes took the cities of Pitru and Mutkanu. This event showed how far Assyria could assert itself militarily when the need arose. The Assyrian king attacked the Aramaeans, forced his way to the far-off Mediterranean and constructed a stela in the area of Mount Attalur. Ashur-ishi II, in all likelihood a fairly elderly man due to the length of his father's reign, had a largely uneventful period of rule, concerning himself with defending Assyria's borders and conducting various rebuilding projects within Assyria. Tiglath-Pileser II succeeded him, and reigned for 28 years. He maintained the policies of his recent predecessors, but appears to have had an uneventful reign.